welcome everyone. I am honored as the interim dean to host this Dean Speaker Series event. It's wonderful for me because I know Roger personally. Roger and I first met sometime during the Clinton administration, and we have been together on many a podium and in many a think tank event and many a commission.
Right.
So I want to basically start with the fact that we have here a really outstanding person, a person who has had a multi-sectoral career, a person who has been, let me start with a little anecdote. I was saying to Roger, there's a wonderful thing called How I Got Here, and there's a little bit of a history of Roger. And the first thing that comes up is his parents said, his mother said, who is a school teacher, stay in school as long as you can.
Right.
So Roger got numerous degrees. He got an undergraduate degree, he got a JD, he got a PhD in economics. He says that his academic-y kind of nature, maybe sometimes nerdy kind of nature, has made him an empathetic CEO, which is an interesting observation. So he has had a career that has spanned government, where he was the first African American who became vice chair of the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And here's a really important thing about role models. It turns out that the first African American appointed to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve was Andrew Brimmer. And what I've read is that when you were 15 years old,
right,
all of a sudden that was a possibility.
Right.
Here's somebody who looks like me,
right,
who actually can be this thing. That is so inspiring, the importance of role models. So basically, Roger has got on from leadership in the Federal Reserve System. And by the way, on 9/11, he was the only governor of the Federal Reserve sitting in Washington, D.C. And he had to do things like make sure that cash got to ATMs. Just imagine how people were responding then. Okay, it's an emergency. You don't know what the situation is going to be. You need some funds. You need to go to your ATM. There's Roger making sure that the Fed is making sure that the cash is at the ATM, making sure that the global economy knows that the liquidity that is always being provided by the U.S. government will be provided by the Fed. So this was incredibly important. And I actually didn't know that at the time, so I was really impressed by that.
Okay.
This is something we can discuss in terms of leadership challenges. After leaving the Board of Governors as vice chair, Roger entered there from McKinsey, so I will say that, and before that a law firm to McKinsey too. Roger has said, and this is really interesting, I didn't feel comfortable going from a top-level bank regulator into a bank. How many people even ask themselves that question? That is a really important philosophical public policy question. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So he went instead to a global reinsurance system, Swiss Re. And then from Swiss Re, he ended up at TIAA. And I'll ask him a number of questions about TIAA. He's been there for a decade. TIAA is 100 years old, celebrating its 100th birthday. You're celebrating your 10 years? Is that about right?
Right.
Okay, and we'll talk about some of the new challenges that a company that is 100 years old but plays a major role in the U.S. financial system, what are the new challenges that they're dealing with? And even during that time as CEO, that's when he was on a commission and we got to work again for President Obama. You remember, we did write a long white paper together on retirement. I'm not sure it changed anything, Roger, but maybe it changed what you did.
It crystallized the issues. So.
All right, okay. So those are just some highlights of a spectacular career. And I want to start out with an observation just about TIAA right now. First of all, the suggestion that we have Roger came from one of our students, one of our executive MBA students sitting right here, Thomas Greenville, who works for TIAA.
Why don't you stand up
so I want to say that I think we get many major lessons from that. One is, those of you who haven't thought about a career at a company like TIAA should start thinking about it. You're going to hear about some amazing things about this company. Many of you may not even know what it is, but really, this is a great, great company. Two, we really do listen to students. So if you have a suggestion for an outstanding person you would like to be a Dean Speaker Series representative, please let us know. Please let us know. We can make that happen. I think Thomas had to work on this for about a year. We had to get Roger's schedule together so we could fit this in. So the last thing I will say before I go to the question is just the 100-year anniversary of TIAA. There's another very important thing which is very relevant right now. You would not necessarily know this, Roger, but we just have spent a very significant amount of leadership time at Haas trying to improve our culture and our practices in diversity and inclusion. And your company is regularly listed in the top 40, 50 companies in the world that actually embraces a diverse and inclusive culture in a way that creates opportunities for everyone. So I just want to say that I'm very interested in hearing about that as well. Okay, so now let's start at the beginning. And you have such a distinguished career, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to start at the beginning, but try to go through a number of areas. I already mentioned that your parents said that you should stay in school as long as possible. Your father used to take you to Federal Reserve Bank. Right. That's pretty amazing, I think that.
Yeah, that's a little strange.
You grew up in the civil rights era.
Yeah.
And when you were a senior, Martin Luther King was assassinated. There was a lot of...
Junior, right.
Junior, okay. A lot of sort of racial tension, uncertainty, violence in the world. What do you remember about that? How did that affect you in terms of thinking about where you could end up and what you wanted to do?
All right, so you're right, I grew up in the civil rights era. Now, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so it was the South, but it wasn't the deep South. And I was very fortunate because when I started out in school, the schools in D.C. were segregated. By the time I was going to junior high school, the schools had become integrated. And then in high school, I went to a school called Sidwell Friends School, which is a small, now pretty elite private school, known nationally because Chelsea Clinton went there, the Obama daughters went there, so it's a pretty elite school. So I migrated through, in terms of racial components, from an all-black environment to a junior high school that was mainly black, but not exclusively, to a high school where in my graduating class of 80 kids, there were 5 black kids. Right, that's okay. So the civil rights movement really affected me in the following sense. One is Washington was the hotbed of much, not all, obviously. And so anything that's going on in the nation really has a big impact on the psyche of most folks in Washington, D.C., because it's in the newspaper on a daily basis. Secondly, I really did come to understand that I could do pretty well in being in an elite kind of white environment. I ended up being one of the top kids, not the top, but one of the top 2 or 3 out of Sidwell. And I thought, well, I can actually do it. I belong here. I can do this. There's a lot of stuff I can't do, but I'm pretty good at going to school, and I discovered. And so the civil rights movement also gave me, ironically, a real sense of I'm as much of an insider as anybody else. It actually ironically helped that I was at an inside kind of school. Right. So my classmates were the sons and daughters of people who were very big in the Kennedy and Johnson administration. I see. And so it was this very odd inside-outside feeling. Like, okay, I'm in this elite group. These terrible things are happening to people who look like me. I went to a Quaker school, which was very welcoming. Right. And so I had in some sense, a very blessed experience. Being an African American, clearly lots going on, but in a school where I was feeling pretty much protected, was doing quite well academically. And I ironically had the sense that people really wanted to see me succeed.
They wanted to see you succeed, right.
And it was, I'm sure, quite different had I been, some other location. Right. But I also had the sense that, gee, I really have to do something. People are...
Right, you have to do something, right.
People are dying around.
Right.
People look like me are being, beaten up and abused, and I can't just take this very lucky position I have for granted.
Right.
So I really did have a desire to achieve something, taking all these great things that had fallen into my lap and trying to convert that into something meaningful.
Right, right. So I will just say so many of the words you just used have resonance for me in terms of gender. Right. I'd say the same thing. You're there, all of a sudden you realize you're an insider, but you're also an outsider.
Right.
But you realize as you're an insider, that's a huge opportunity.
Exactly.
So there's also a lot of kind of pressure, but it's good pressure to actually, show that you can do this. Okay,
Absolutely.
Show that you can do this. I happened to be doing this when Gloria Steinem was at her height. So I met her recently and I said, whenever I thought of quitting, I heard you in the background saying, don't. It's like, so anyway, they're very interesting.
But this is where the Andrew Rimmer story comes in, because Andrew Rimmer was the son of sharecroppers. And he had gone on to get a PhD in economics from Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And so it was exactly the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
He could go from nothing to something.
Yeah.
I could do the same, I would hope.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's important, and role models really are important. Right. So now let's go to that day on 9/11. I summarized a little bit what I thought you were doing, but clearly this series is very much about leadership skills. So here you are put in the position of having to lead the effort of response in this 9/11 crisis situation. So what skills did you draw upon, or what did you have to do, and what enabled you to do it?
All right, so you put your finger on it in a way that people understand. So the most important thing was to provide ample liquidity, not just for the United States, but across the world. And you've summarized it in a way that everyone understands, which is think about dollar bills and ATMs. For those who are more attuned to how the financial markets work, there's also think about all those checks that many of you don't write checks anymore, but in the old days when I was young,
in the old days, right.
20 years ago, people wrote lots of checks to pay for all of their needs, and those had to be honored overnight, and then get even bigger and think about wholesale payments between, call it General Electric and you name it, in the hundreds of millions of dollars that move around. So the Fed is central to all of that, from the dollar bills, the $20 bills in an ATM, to the check that you write for your rent, if you still do that, to keeping the lights on at the Haas school because University of California, Berkeley has to pay PG&E the bill. So that was the essence of what we had to do, and we had to do it not just in the U.S. but internationally.
Internationally.
So what are the skills, since this is about leadership? There were 3 or 4 that really became important, and I'm going to do them in an order that's slightly different from the way I often talk about. One was basically fortitude, right? So you can imagine a crisis hits, no one knows what's going on. The president had ordered that Washington be evacuated. And I chose a different path. I said, no, we're not going to evacuate. If we leave, how are things going to work? I looked out, you know this well, most folks don't, but the feds in Constitution Avenue on that day, it was like the worst possible nightmare in terms of traffic. So the first thing was to decide we're going to stay and we're going to be open and operating. And I had to decide that over the objection of a number of the Federal Reserve Bank presidents who wanted to close the system.
Wow.
Not thinking about the implications of that. So we had what described as a testy phone call at 10 o'clock. I would describe it as one where there was a frank exchange of views. And we decided we were going to be open and operating, and we issued a statement. So that's one thing. And I think
ultimately the authority was with you as the vice chair.
All the authority was ultimately with me as the vice chairman, because Alan Greenspan was stuck in airspace. All the other governors were around the country doing different things, and the telephone system wasn't working.
It wasn't working.
So the authority ultimately rested with me. But I also wanted to bring people along
Sure,
and not
sure,
be
sure,
a
sure.
petty dictator.
Sure,
So,
sure. I understand that.
right, you understand
Right.
that choice, that fine line of bringing people along without dictating. So one was just the fortitude of we are going to stay put and we are going to do our jobs. I had taken an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States. And on that day, the Constitution was really, the Republic was fundamentally threatened. I know this seems like ancient history to some of you, but for some of us, it was real world.
Yep.
The second thing that I learned about leadership, it's really important to have expertise. I was the only Fed governor who had actually spent part of a night doing the actual process of clearing checks. This is, again, ancient history to you, but that's the way things used to work. I had spent a fair amount of my time with the folks who manage the ATMs in the system and who manufacture them. There are two who manufacture ATMs. I was the chairman of the committee that dealt with payment systems oversight.
Okay.
And I also represented us internationally. One of the things we had to do on that day was lend money to the Bank of Canada, to the Bank of Japan, because they didn't have enough dollars to cover the dollar issues that they needed in their countries. So having done all of that for many years, I had a kind of expertise around how the system works. And this is sort of the arcane part of the Fed. Everyone else wanted to do, I love doing monetary policy.
Monetary policy, right.
That was the glory stuff. And then there's the dull payment system. Who cares about that stuff? Right. And it turns out that I cared a lot about it. So the expertise came into play.
Fantastic.
The third skill on that day was really important, was to have a lot of empathy. I know this issue about being an empathetic leader. You have to imagine in Washington, D.C. And in New York, we were clearly under attack. No one knew what was happening. I felt this myself. I had two kids. My son was in the 4th or 5th grade. My daughter was in the kindergarten. They were calling, my son in particular. And that was happening across thousands of people in the system. So a real understanding that I was asking people to stay put, do their jobs while there was chaos all around us. And it truly actually affected me personally. And the final trait that really came through was the ability to communicate. So I had to communicate very clearly what we're doing and why we're doing it. Not at a micro level, but we're going to provide all the liquidity necessary to keep the global economy running. Once people got that direction, then it all filtered down. And I had to make that same announcement publicly, and there was a little bit of a debate about what the announcement should be. Some people wanted to do a long, elaborate thing. I wanted to do a short, we're open and operating, we're providing all the liquidity necessary, and that's what we did. And that has sort of become part of the Federal Reserve law, the open and operating statement. And so if that's a story of leadership, it's around certain kind of fortitude, because bad things happen when you're the leader. It's around expertise, because you have to know what you're asking of the system that you're overseeing. It's around empathy, because all this worked through people. And if thousands of people had said, to heck with you, Roger, I'm going home,
you couldn't have done it.
It wouldn't have happened.
You couldn't have done it.
And it was around communication, so that people were clear about what the main goals and objectives are, and then they could figure out how their piece was going to come to life to bring all this together. So those are sort of the lessons associated with it.
Thank you.
One other thing I have to say, my wife was at the SEC at the time. She was responsible for overseeing all of the securities markets in the country. And so this is actually a bit of a teamwork.
A bit of a teamwork.
No, it really was.
The securities markets functioning and the global economy functioning.
Right.
That is great family leadership and great individual leadership. No, it's wonderful. Thank you for telling us
I fear she doesn't get enough. Her name is Annette Nazareth. She doesn't get enough credit.
Thank you very much. No, that's very important. All right, so then you hit another, not the same magnitude of crisis, but clearly the financial crisis of 2011 was actually very important for the financial services industry.
Right.
So at that time you were at TIAA.
I had just joined TIAA at the beginning of 2008. Right.
So how did that affect, I mean, I just remember that I was on a board of a major financial services company. Nobody had a sense of what to do. I mean, they really were completely, just thought the capital markets were really closing down, that there was a run on the system. how did it affect TIAA or what you felt needed to be done?
Well, now let's say most of you don't know what TIAA is, so let me just give them a minute.
Excellent.
So TIAA is a company that invests about $1.2 trillion on behalf of people in the not-for-profit sector around the United States, and we basically provide it back to them as retirement income. We were started 100 years ago by Andrew Carnegie. So you should think of us as a long-term, very large, very diversified asset manager. Many other things we do, but we do really cool and interesting money management if you want. So the first thing that we had to worry about is, well, do we have any of this stuff in our portfolio that's blowing up?
Okay, right.
And we had to de-risk the portfolio. The good news was that we had a big debate in the company around whether or not we were being paid appropriately for the risk of subprime. And, knock on wood, the right answer won out, which is we decided we weren't being paid enough. So we had already been in the process of reducing our subprime holdings.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you saw the risk premium as different.
We saw it as different from everybody
different
else.
From everybody else.
Now,
okay.
we have the advantage of doing that because we are in the business of paying off long-term liabilities. So we take a very, very long-term perspective. And it really paid off. We put a huge amount of weight on risk. And so we had a culture, you talk about culture, that forced these tough conversations, and fortunately we came up with the right answer. Having said that, because I didn't want to put anyone's retirement at risk, I decided that we'd have to reduce our own expense base by, then it was about 20% of the budget.
Really?
$400 million over a 2-year period, which was very, very painful.
That's very painful. 20% is, yeah.
It's huge.
It's huge.
And the third thing that I decided we had to do was to reinforce and rebuild our capital. And so we undertook all three of those things. We de-risked the portfolio, reduced our expenses, and then we rebuilt capital. And then back to the last point, I spent a lot of time communicating to the 5 million Americans that we serve to be calm, don't do anything dramatic, or drastic, and stay with the program. And fortunately, most of them did, because as you well know, we've just had a phenomenal run-up, and had people sold all their equities that we owned on their behalf, they would have missed out. So it was again, communication, leadership, some expertise.
Some expertise, a lot of expertise.
A lot of expertise, and frankly, a little bit of luck.
Yeah. So 2 crises in, yes, that you've handled, and 2 major crises, I think, in terms of effects on financial markets. So why don't we talk a little bit more about TIAA? Because I learned some very interesting things about the asset ownership and the issue of what kind of assets you should own and do own. So I think they would find that very interesting.
As I said, we're in the business of providing for people's retirements. We have 5 million Americans who say with us. The way our system works, all of you are familiar with 401k. So we run the 403b, which is the not-for-profit version of the 401k. We have about 80% market share. So we're investing for the long term. And what that means is we own a range of different kinds of assets. So we're one of the largest owners of publicly traded stock in the world, for sure. But we're also, because we have what's called long-dated liabilities, it's important for us to have assets that will pay off over long periods of time. And so under the time I've been here, we've built up our alternative portfolio, and Thomas works with a lot of that work for us. So we're one of the 4 or 5 largest owners of timber in the world, with large timber stands in northwestern U.S. and across the board into Canada, and in the southeast, and in Chile, and in other parts of the world. We're the 2nd or 3rd largest owner of commercial real estate in the world, including owning shopping malls in China, and we built the 2 largest shopping malls in Germany, et cetera. We are a very large owner of agricultural land in the U.S., in Brazil, and in Eastern Europe, and in Australia. And the one that Laura wants me to get to is we're the
I was
largest.
going to get to it if you didn't.
No. We're the largest grower of grapes in Napa and Sonoma by acreage.
Did you know that? I did not know that.
Some of you are old enough to drink, some of you are not. If you are old enough to drink and you like California wines, please feel free to consume that responsibly because you'll be able to support the retirement of some of your favorite public school teachers and others from around the world. And we got into all this. We got into all this because one of my trustees was a fellow named David Swinson. Is that name familiar to you?
A lot of people.
A lot of folks nodding their heads. So Swinson is the longtime iconic leader of the Yale investment activity. There's a whole Yale School of Endowment and Management, if you will. Yale thought about it. And David hammered me quite a bit the first year I was at the company, in addition to taking care of the crisis, to get bigger into alternatives. And we started to do that 8 or 9 years ago and has paid really very nice dividends for us in many ways. We also were one of the first investors for Henry Kravis and KKR. Many of the banks wouldn't engage and support private equity for a variety of reasons. So we funded him 25, 30 years ago.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And have a nice, privileged relationship with a lot of the PE firms as well.
That's fantastic.
Thomas, is that covered? Anything else I should say? No, seriously. We got 17,000 employees. They own the company. We're not a publicly traded company.
That's right. They own this is an important point. You may,
Right,
may
so
as
we're
well.
not
I was
a
going to
publicly-
raise that. So
We're not a publicly traded company. You can think of us as being sort of like a mutual, which means that the people who save with us really own the company, and our 17,000 employees are an important part of our base. So Thomas is my boss. Does that sound wrong? Roughly right? Yes or no? Seriously.
the clients here are the people who they're the savers, and they are the people who work for the firm.
Right. Okay. Did I cover most of the asset classes? You happy? Okay.
I hope that, I think when I was talking to Roger about how there's a lot of thinking going on now about, compensation and the future of work and how you think about paying people. And I've always been very sympathetic to the notion of at least some significant amount of employee ownership. So this is a very appealing model to me, and I think it's one of the distinctive features that you have.
Oh, I think so. And the good news is it allows us to communicate very clearly to a small number of people who care. And it allows us to make really long-term decisions. So one of the big challenges is so-called short-termism, where CEOs of publicly traded companies have to worry about earnings per share growth every quarter. I don't have to worry about that. I have to be able to talk to 5 million people and say that when you retire 20, 30, 40 years from now, and you are in retirement for 20 and 30 years, we will stand behind you. And that's a very different mindset.
It's a very different mindset.
And it allows us to put a greater weight on risk and think about long-term investments, and longevity is critical to who we are and what we do.
Yeah. I just want to put a pitch in for, I think it's a fabulous company, and a company that may not enter the minds of our students as a possible place to at least explore a career. And when you actually think about the sophistication of what they're doing in financial services, the sophistication of what they're doing in terms of this amazing and very varied sort of engagement with natural resources, with water, with food, I know a lot of people right now in the Haas community are interested in food. I said basically they should actually be interested in TIAA because of its connection to our natural resource base. So that's a little pitch to get more.
Put one more pitch in?
Yeah.
We were also one of the first to do social responsible investing, and we have the largest portfolio of socially screened investments of any asset manager. So if you're interested in that part of the world, you should also come and talk to Thomas and see.
And there is a substantial, we actually have a substantial number of students interested in that part of the world. So that's fantastic. Let's go to retirement a little bit in terms of how does America face some kind of retirement crisis? And I would also like to link this to entitlements, because we're beginning to hear again this notion that, well, the deficit is getting too big, the place we have to deal with is entitlements. But entitlements significantly mean, for many Americans, Social Security and Medicare, that's what they mean, that's what they are. And then you hear these very disturbing statistics about the percentage of savings that the average household has in the United States. So looking at this now as an economist and a public policy maker, how are you thinking about, do we have a retirement crisis? Do we have an entitlements crisis? What should we be doing?
So I describe this as we have a retirement challenge that is going to become a retirement crisis if we don't do something about it.
Okay.
Now, that's sort of a nuance, and I could have said, yes, we have a retirement crisis.
It's important. There's still time.
There is some time, but not a huge amount of time. And the problem starts with both the public sector and the private sector. So in the private sector, the 401k model, different from what we do, to be clear, has not worked as intended. So your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, many of you, had defined benefit plans, work for 20, 30 years in the company, and they pay you a percentage of your salary for the rest of your retirement. Over time, that's evaporated in the private sector, been replaced by a 401k model, which is you save as much as you can, the company saves some, and then at the end of, when you get to retirement, it's sort of up to you.
Up to you.
We don't do that, so while I say we're like a 401k, we aren't exactly the same. So the challenges are that the 401k system has not incented enough people to save. Not enough people even signed up, and at the end, they aren't sure what to do with whatever money they did save.
Okay.
So the solutions are obviously to flip each one of those things around. It takes a long time, so the reason that this is, to put it mildly, a challenge, maybe a crisis, is it's not as though we can suddenly create a big pool of savings. To give you a sense of what we think the shortfall may be, my friends and former colleagues at the Fed have estimated that for private sector retirement savings, we may be short as a country by 2 to 3 trillion with a T dollars. So we can't make that up very quickly. But going forward, many of you are relatively young, so I would encourage you, when you get that job, if you have one already, please start the process of savings. You have to do that. And so we have to fix the saving crisis, which is going to be a multi-generational challenge. In the meantime, you get to the other side, which is for many people, Social Security is their bedrock saving. And we need to fix that as well. As you know, and your audience may know, the trustees of Social Security have said that the trust fund, as it's called, will be in a position in 15 years or so, call it 2033, 2035, that it can only pay out 75% of the promises. That's not to say it's going to go away, but it is to say only 75%. And you should understand that 75% of what the average Social Security recipient receives now is going to be less than $2,000 a month. So we do have a serious challenge there. Most economists would say there are 3 ways to fix the Social Security system. One is to gradually increase the age at which you can get full retirement, because we're all living older. Now, whenever I say that, your friend and my friend, Mitch Trumka, who runs the AFL-CIO, says there are people for whom that's not possible. Blue-collar work, pink-collar work. But for those of us in the white-collar world, we can actually retire a little later. The second thing is to figure out whether or not the current Social Security tax cap should be raised. And then the third, which would just basically mean those of us who are lucky enough to have moderate to high income jobs could pay in a bit more to the system. And the third is to change the way that the inflation for Social Security is calculated, which is a more technical thing.
More technical, right?
But the truth is we can fix Social Security, so we do have an entitlement problem. We can fix it.
We can.
In the private sector, it's a longer fix that involves younger people saving more and older folks working a little bit longer, and then we have to fix some of the other challenges as well. Is that helpful?
So you champion a lot the issue of financial literacy. Is it the case that people are not saving enough because they don't know enough about their alternatives, or how does that financial literacy fit into this problem?
It fits in a number of places. I think a reason that the participation rate in 401ks is so low is an absence of financial literacy.
Okay.
We've tried to overcome that by using behavioral economics, so we now have in many places what's called automatic enrollment.
Automatic enrollment, right.
The other short issue around financial literacy is even those who enroll don't save enough, and so we've tried to fix that by having matches. So you put in 3% of your salary and your company puts in 3% or 5 and 5, whatever it may be. There's another problem, which is that people, as they earn more, don't realize that they should be saving more. And so we try to fix that with what's called automatic escalations. And so there's a low level of financial literacy, and the way the industry has responded to it is by taking lessons from behavioral economics and using a variety of what we call nudges
Right.
to encourage people. The other big risk in the private sector is what's called leakage, which is to say people go and take loans out from their 401k. And so the society tries very hard to limit that by a set of rules around hardship lending and other things. So the two are intertwined. Low level financial literacy means a tendency for poor performance, and the way the retirement industry has tried to overcome that is by using behavioral economic nudges.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think the behavioral, I know that the automatic enrollment in 401ks, 403, these have been they've been quite effective. So they've been reasonably effective.
Reasonably effective.
Right.
To be totally transparent, there's a lot of economic research now that says it turns out that those who are automatically enrolled have a lower commitment to that as a savings tool, and we're finding, unfortunately, bigger withdrawals from those who were automatically enrolled versus those who weren't. So
that's really interesting.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword. If you drive things by nudges, people haven't made an intentional decision, and it turns out that the degree of commitment to staying the path on the course may not be as high as we'd like. And that literally is research from the last 6 months or so.
That's new research,
that's
because
research.
For quite some time the sort of notion was this was going to be the solution. Right. We just get people in, they don't care that much, but they're in, and then they'll just keep being in. But you're saying,
now it turns out the not care that much part of that has created some, we've just literally over the last 3 or 4 or 5 months have discovered some negative outcomes.
Amazing, very important. You can see why it's really important to have someone who is very attuned to the economic literature, and I know that Roger is, so basically he would know that research exists. So thank you very much. Now that goes back to the point about your definition of leadership, because I think it's really, you are a CEO working in a field that you deeply understand. You understand it as an economist, you understand it as a regulator, you understand it as a kind of operator. And oftentimes, I mean, when you think about what are the leadership qualities that a CEO needs, I think sometimes we don't emphasize enough expertise in the thing that you're doing.
I think that's right. I mean, fortunately, most CEOs have started at the bottom, the middle, whatever, and work their way up.
If that's the case, then yes.
That's fine. But even there, they've tended to come out of one area or another.
Yes.
They're out of the finance part, of the marketing part, et cetera. But I do think this expertise is really important, because otherwise you get to this issue of the inspirational CEO who gives a great speech and rallies people around a vision. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
But so I describe that as necessary, but not sufficient. Particularly if what your company is doing is something as sort of technical as what we do. My company is heavily driven by folks who do compliance, as Thomas does, or very sophisticated modeling in the actuarial sciences, or trying to give people really good advice about long-term decisions. These things are all, financial services in general, my company in particular, is heavily driven by technical skill. As opposed to cool, slick marketing. Most of you have probably never seen a TIAA ad. We're not a marketing-driven organization. Some of you may have.
No, the first thing that they would probably do is say, come up with a new name, so
Right, I know.
like Alphabet. So Roger's on the board of Alphabet, which is a cool name for Google,
Right.
I gather. So that actually gets me to, I'm going to try to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to encourage all of you to get up, and sort of we'll have 10 minutes or so for questions. So one is about how FinTech, artificial intelligence, machines that learn and can maybe solve all the problems that you and Thomas have been solving, how is that transforming what you do? Or how do you,
And so this whole world of FinTech is really transforming, it's creating evolution. So I want to be cautious because the first analogy to think of when you think of new technologies is, if you had a very serious illness, would you want to, who would you want to, or what would you want to look at your x-ray? And the answer for most people, if you know anything about it, is you want the computer-aided system to look at x-rays. They're much better at picking out anomalies. If it turned out you had a really bad illness, who did you want to come talk to you? The computer or an empathetic doctor? So the reason I start with that analogy is to say, I think FinTech is going to enable our human beings to do a better job, not replace them.
Okay.
So what have I seen? We are using some artificial intelligence to help us do big analysis of data that leads to better outcomes in investing. We're using a fair amount of AI and mapping technology to help us think about how we irrigate our land hectare by hectare. We have a big Brazilian subsidiary that does that. We absolutely are using technologies to help us understand when someone calls in on the phone by the language that they use, how stressed they are, and we then try to move them to one of our advisors. We're using technology to help look at people's portfolios and develop what we're calling the next best action. So knowing what your portfolio looks like, what is the next best thing for you to do? But all of that is enabling, I think, us to give better outcomes, not displacing people, but allowing our teams to be more productive. We also are using these so-called bots, which are basically these little algorithms, to help us do some of the more mechanical work of transforming or taking a number from one field and putting and pre-populating a document, for example, to reduce human errors. So a lot of heavy use of tech, the beginnings of the use of technology, but in a way that's making us more productive, and I hope freeing up time from less value-added, more mechanical activities to create opportunities for us to be more value-added in providing the sensitive kind of advice that we're supposed to provide.
So do you worry about, those are all extremely important examples. There's a broad concern out there about, will at the end of the day, the technology displace a significant number of good jobs? I don't want to think about it that way. I want to think about it. We had a period of time, it was 2005, 2015, where the fastest growing category of work in the United States was essentially independent workers, workers who actually do not have an employer. They do a number of tasks. Some of them, sometimes they're called gig workers, but it doesn't matter whether they're called gig workers or not. They're contractors.
Right.
They don't have an employer. And what do we need to add to help those people save, or do we have what we need?
Well, no, the answer is we don't have what we need. The challenge with the so-called gig economy is that most benefits, think of healthcare, think of what I do, retirement, are associated with your employer. It's an employer-provided benefit. If you don't have a regular employer, if you're, let's say, a 1099 worker, as they're called,
1099,
then you're at one removed and excluded from the kind of benefit system that we have structured in the U.S., which is heavily driven by working. So we do need to think of new mechanisms for gig workers, 1099 workers, contingent workers, to get engaged in the benefit system of the society. The Obama administration tried to create a state-driven system around retirement savings called Myra and a few other things, social choice kind of capability, I think it was called. And that was merely to incent more businesses to offer.
To offer more business to
these
offer.
things,
Right.
which is a good idea, but then that still leaves out those who don't have a full-time employer. So we need to have a brand new sense of how to create a social safety net for individuals who are in the gig economy, who aren't tethered to a really big
A
organization.
single employer. Okay, I want to end my questions with just your experience, what lessons for us here at Haas about creating a truly diverse and inclusive culture, because you clearly have done that at TIAA.
So I think it starts with a couple of things. One is the intention to do it. Right?
Okay.
So don't leave it as an unspoken, wouldn't it be nice? Decide that this is really important. Then the second thing is to figure out then what are the mechanisms to create that. So we have in our company an insistence that there be a diverse pool for any and every job.
Any and every job.
Secondly, I've seen, and I'm a beneficiary of this, from the board of my company, there was insistence that we have a diverse pool for the CEO selection, and lo and behold, they found this little short, slightly overweight black guy.
Yeah, I think I've been the subject of such, not the same description, but the notion that you search broadly, and then if you decide to search broadly, you find people you would otherwise not have found.
Exactly.
You just wouldn't have thought of it.
You just wouldn't have thought of it. And I was the least likely candidate to do this. So, you have
This
to...
is not true, by the way, but it's a PhD,
I was not the least likely, but
No.
I was a result of a long search, to be fair.
I'm sure
And
that's
so
right.
you need to put in processes and procedures. And the final thing is you have to explain to people why this is an important value. And in my company, it is both, it's the right thing to do, going back to, we were one of the first to start social responsible investing. So we've been recognized many times as one of the world's most ethical companies, so this is consistent with ethics, but it's also consistent with who we serve. Our population in the not-for-profit sector, disproportionately female, minority representation growing very, very rapidly, and so we want to look like our participant base. And so even if you didn't think it was the right thing to do, if you want to be consumer-friendly and successful in this space, this is what you need to do. And so that creates a real sense of wherever you might be. And then the final thing, back to my sort of nerdy academic-y approach to the world, there's an awful lot of academic research that diverse and inclusive teams make better decisions.
Yes.
So, I've talked to a guy named Scott Page at the University of Michigan who's done all this work. And that has given me, at least, and us, I think, a real sense that this is a must-have because it's validated by what the latest thinking is.
Right.
Can you hear me with the mic?
I think, yeah, it sounded like the mic went off. It did sound like
Okay,
that.
that's right.
Yes.
I will speak up more loudly. Oh, we're going to bring a handheld.
I want to encourage some questions. I mean, I have more. I think we have a mic. Can you go over to the mic there? It's just easier. We can hear you if you... And just introduce yourself and what program or what connection to Haas you have. I'll start over here.
Thank you.
Because she was getting up first. That's all.
Thanks, Dean Tyson, and thank you. Someone from DC in investment management and SRI, there was a lot for me here today. Just going back to the assets that you outlined that TIAA has a lot of on behalf of its employees and customers, can you help us understand how the organization thinks about shocks to the system, like what climate change might bring about?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Okay.
ironically, before Laura came in to have lunch, I was talking to a professor from the
School of Public Policy.
School of
Goldman
Public
School.
Policy
Right.
named Solomon Shee, who does a lot on climate change. So we're always thinking about this. We think of it as a potential risk to the system. We have to understand short and intermediate terms effects. We worry about things as simple as the bee collapse that happened a couple of years ago and what that means for pollination, and how we can overcome it where we can using technology, for example. So this is high on our list. It is one of those very, very difficult risks for us to manage because it's like a, no pun intended, but sort of a slow melting iceberg. And so when and where it shows up, given our portfolio, is important. But already we've started to think about some of the buildings that we own, are they going to be able to withstand these issues We're investing in lead capabilities, et cetera. So it comes into play in almost everything we think over a longer period of time. It's really very critical to us. Is that responsive?
Do you think about the issue of stranded assets? The sort of notion that
Yes.
somehow or other some of the oil and gas is not ever going to be valued at what the market thinks it's currently valued
Yes,
at?
there's no doubt. We literally 2 or 3 weeks ago had a conversation around this question of stranded assets and what does this mean. And part of the challenge is those assets are highly valuable today.
They're highly valuable today.
So how do you think about pricing today versus pricing 50 years from now? But without a doubt, we are thinking about exactly that kind of question.
Hello, my name is Evan Wright. I'm a full-time MBA student, first year. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Ferguson, for taking your time to share your wisdom with us. Like you, I'm from DC. Like you, I also went to Sidwell Friends for high school after going to public school for my experience before
my
that.
goodness.
You should be sitting in this seat. Come on up.
Not yet. But I'm interested to learn more about how you took those experiences, being one of few in a room, all those experiences at Sidwell and at Harvard, and how you took that and how that influenced your particular brand and approach to leadership, and maybe the way you've approached your roles since.
I think it's had 2 or 3 different impacts. One is this point that Laura made about empathy, but it also, in a very practical sense, I hope, the way I manage meetings creates a more inclusive culture. So I try very hard to observe who's not speaking up in a room and figure out how do I bring that person in. Right, because I was that little skinny rink black kid with a big afro in Sidwell in 1966. And some teacher had actually asked, make sure that I was included in the conversation. And so I think it's really very important. The other, though, is to recognize that, indeed, there's a special kind of role model that I would say, dealing with, right? Because, and I emphasize dealing with it, because I don't want to be, the black CEO. There are only 3 of us left, and I get interviewed about what it's like to be the black CEO. On the other hand, I'm not going to pretend I'm not black. I'm sort of stupid. And so how do I navigate that question? Right? Because I don't want people, my company is broadly diverse. And I don't want anyone in my company to think, well, Roger, because he's black, is sort of leaning that direction. On the other hand, I don't want my black colleagues to think, well, what's with Roger? He's trying to pretend he's not black. So I'm just being very honest. This is this leadership discussion. Being a member of a minority group leading a broadly diverse population is a wonderful gift that has a few challenges, because I've got to have 17,000 people, most of whom don't look like me, still believe that I'm thinking about them. And that is a very, very important thing. And so I'm very comfortable in my skin, but one of the big lessons I've learned, being the majority and the minority, is you've got to be highly sensitive to all of those. And so the most important lesson I learned is some days I'm going to be in the majority, sometimes I'm going to be in the minority. Every day I got to be fair to everybody, because otherwise, you lose your credibility. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
It
Thank
makes terrific sense.
And I was just at Sidwell 2 weeks ago. They're one of our, not biggest, one of our smaller clients, but the campus is looking good. I'm sure they miss you.
I'll talk to you more about that after.
Absolutely.
Nora.
I hate to follow that question. That discussion was really wonderful. Thank you both. My name is Nora Silver. I'm a faculty member here. I come from the nonprofit sector. Thank you for handling my retirement with care. I appreciate it. I want to ask you about your multi-sector career that Laura started with, because you've hopped different jobs for pay from different sectors. I also understand you've served on commissions and nonprofit boards, including your alma mater. What have been the benefits? Why have you done that? What have been the main benefits from that kind of career path for you?
I think it's given me an incredible comparative advantage. So having been a regulator and understanding what they're trying to do and now being regulated, I think really has helped me to be, I would say, multilingual. There's so many financial services CEOs who grew up and live in New York. professionally and maybe personally, and they think of regulation and Washington as this alien culture. And there's so many folks in the public sector who've never worked in the private sector and think of that as an alien group of all sorts of nefarious goals and objectives. The ability to speak to each and to be, I use the word multilingual or bilingual, I think it's given me a real comparative advantage. Nothing inappropriate, but the fact that I'm comfortable dealing with a Federal Reserve governor, understanding what he or she is trying to achieve, and at the same time, comfortable dealing with a big-time asset management person in New York, has been really to me, very, very helpful in terms of creating credibility. I hope people trust me. In terms of, back to this issue of empathy, helping for regulators to succeed in the things that they legitimately have to succeed at and avoid demonizing them, and helping for regulators to understand the goals and objectives of the private sector that are also quite legitimate. And so I've been very blessed the ability to do both, and I think it actually creates the ability to see the 360 of every complex situation and hopefully find that path forward that maybe others don't see because they're blinded to part of the 360, part of the circle. Does that make sense?
It does.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dee Zhang. I'm from the Executive MBA program. Thank you for being here today. The question I wanted to ask you, now I've learned a lot from your talk about what you did during the Fed during 9/11 and also during the financial crisis. As the leader of an organization like TIAA, how do you respond to things like the recent controversy about your fees on your annuities and the education institutions? They're raising issues about conflicts of interest, opaqueness. I imagine there must be more than one voice within your organization, probably outside too.
Yeah, so good question. I respond to any of these things with total transparency and without being defensive. And so on many of these things, by definition, we're very proud of who we are, what we stand for. We've been doing this for 100 years. And no one, to the best of my knowledge, has ever come back after saving with us and saying, boy, we don't have enough money. Having said that, I don't hold us or me out as paragons of perfection. And so I'm always interested in listening closely to anyone who has a different angle, sees things differently, and trying to figure out, well, are they right? Are they wrong? We didn't get to be 100 years old by presuming that we have all the answers and no one else does. It just wouldn't work that way. So, I'm in the business of what I think of as continuous improvement for myself personally and for the company. I describe one of the things that I do as being a continuous learner, and I want the company to do that. Right. And so if somebody comes along and says, what you're doing over here isn't quite right, my first reaction is to, okay, how are you seeing that? Why do you think it's not quite right? And what can we do better? It does help that we are not a publicly traded company, so I don't have to do a trade-off between what one of my participants, as we call them, wants versus what the shareholder wants. So I'm lucky in that regard. But I start with the notion of, you own this company, tell us what you see, and if you like it or don't like it, let's see if we can fix it. To go to your first question, to the best of my knowledge, no one's complained much about our fees on our annuities because we are, without a doubt, one of the cheapest in the industry. But there are places where I'm sure we're not perfect.
That's very helpful. One final question. Yes.
Sure. Hi, Mr. Ferguson. I'm Ben, my first year MBA. I actually met you a couple years ago. I'm not sure if you remember at Cipriani's at a SEO dinner with Henry Kravis.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Were you an SEO student?
I was, yeah. SEO
congratulations.
Scholar. Yeah, thank you.
Do folks here know what SEO is? No. Why don't you take 1 minute to describe it?
So SEO it stands for Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, and it's catered to more so like juniors and seniors in college that want to get into investment banking, sales and trading, and the top firms in New York: Goldman, Morgan Stanley, JP,
TIAA.
TIAA. Well, there you go.
Well.
He was getting there.
I can tell you. He just needed to be coached.
Yeah. So I kind of have a two-part question. Number one, it's kind of similar to that question in terms of ESG, fees, and funds. You're starting to see a lot more like BlackRock and Goldman Parnassus having a lot of these social funds.
Yes.
Does that give any pressure in terms of having to change your fee schedule or adjust to the competition?
No, so let me. When people have two questions, I always ask them to stop after the first because I don't know about Laura, but I always forget the second.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we have been very pleased, frankly, to see more traditional asset managers enter the space of social responsible and ER and ESG for a number of reasons. One is it creates a lot of credibility about what we've been doing for the last 40, 50 years. Suddenly, it's not just those do-gooders who take care of teachers, but it's everybody. Secondly, frankly, it forces businesses to take this more seriously. So we've been engaged in those conversations, and the fact that Larry Fink sends a letter and other things, that it sort of raises the stakes for the companies in which we invest to do this the right way. Third, it makes for more deep and liquid markets. If there's going to be real trading in SRI and ESG type activities, it can't only be us. Back to my academic side, I'm a deep believer that we need deep and liquid markets. That means you need more market participants. So, I'm welcoming any and all to join us in the SRI ESG space because it just simply validates what we've been doing for many years and creates an asset class that I think is more sustainable over time. And finally, as a pure public good, giving more individuals an opportunity to invest that way can only be positive. While we're huge, we only have several billions. And they add other billions, and that means more individuals who can't work with us get a chance to still express their interests and have their investments express their values.
The second part is just quickly in regards to just having the mentorship and sponsorship in a firm. I think mentorship is one thing if you work for a big company, but can you talk a little bit about just the sponsorship and having a sponsor, someone who's like a high level leader at a firm that is perhaps willing to leverage that political currency or leverage that political capital to help younger folks in the firm?
So, look, it starts, I believe, with the people recognizing how their own careers evolved, right? That when you get to be top of the house, depending on who you are, you either think you did it yourself or you did it with lots of other people. And I try to reinforce the notion that we all got to where we are because many folks helped us along the way. And we ought to, I think the phrase now is pay it forward. I never quite understood that phrase because I'm used to paying it back. But whatever the right phrase is.
Yeah, right. What are the new phrases?
Whatever the phrase is. Secondly, I remind people again that, particularly in our company, all of my life savings is in this firm. So I need to have the next generation grow and develop and be at least as good, if not better than I am, because my retirement depends on it. So when you are in charge of running a retirement company, you are immediately thinking intergenerationally. I'm looking around and saying, who among all of my younger colleagues is going to be the next steward of my life savings? So I've got a real selfish interest, and I remind everybody, we all have a selfish interest in mentoring and bringing along, the best of the best, because we own this company. So my company, in some sense, is a little easier than other places. And finally, I've modeled something that I would encourage others, which is I actually have some folks come and do what's called reverse mentoring, because I realize that I learn an awful lot from my millennial colleagues about how they see the world, and that's really important because they are representatives of the millennial generation that we have to attract and retain. Again, we have 80% market share. All of those folks who are in the not-for-profit sector who are 55 plus just naturally think of us. But those folks who are 25 to 35 might be thinking of other people. So it's really good business practice for me to both be a mentor, but more importantly, to be mentored, because everyone in financial services is trying to figure out what does it take to break into the mind of a millennial. No, seriously, that's not an insulting comment. It's true.
Absolutely true. There are courses now in business school managing millennials.
Oh, the financial lives of millennials is totally different from my life. As witness the fact that I still write checks. How many people here under the age of 35 have written a check in the last week? Right. And everyone's sort of chuckling. It's like, whoa.
I just used some cash yesterday, and the founder of Silver Lake was laughing at me.
Oh,
He said,
I know.
I've never seen any cash in a while here. I said, I'm just buying an iced tea for good.
But anyway, that's a long way of saying you got to do mentoring. It's got to be both.
Yeah, it's got to be
And-
both. I love that
And
concept.
it's for us, it's really a business imperative because the company won't live for another 100 years if we aren't bringing along that next generation of folks.
I think that is
Thank
such
you.
a great note on which to end, because there's a lot of possibilities at an undergraduate and graduate institution like Berkeley for reverse mentoring. And I've actually never actually thought of the concept before. I try to get my reverse mentoring from my son, but why not get it from the, it's a terrific idea. I know you've written a report on undergraduate education. I mean, really, Roger has been thinking about the good of the society in which he functions through his entire career in different ways, and we are just so honored to have you here. I really, no, absolutely, it's been fantastic. It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thomas, thank you.
Really great, really great. Your answers are so good. They're so, absolutely.
Well, thank you all very much, and I would encourage you to talk to Thomas and others about what the company does. I'm not here as a chief marketer, but it's a great company, so.
I'm going to market you, don't worry.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Thanks, everybody.